Smells like burnt rubber in the morning.
Welcome back to the channel. So you can see behind me, I've got a pretty special car back here. I've known about this car for a long time, and I've known the people that owned it for quite a while, probably a good decade or so. And I've been trying to get them to let me get it back on the road for them for a long time, and finally I've got it going on. So I had originally started making the video on this car as something I could give to the previous owner once it was done. As it turned out, I wound up buying this car. So I started off with the day I went over to go look at it to kind of evaluate what all it was going to need. And this is how this car had sat in this garage for over 12 years. Under the cover, just sitting there on 4 flat tires, dead battery, window down, waiting for somebody to come, I guess basically resurrect it or wake it up. So the day we went to get the car, I enlisted a longtime friend of mine, David Sparkles there. He and I have worked on cars together since, my gosh, the late 90s. So we knew what we needed to do. We needed to get some air in the tires, make sure that we could just move the car. We knew we weren't going to start it or try and crank the motor over until I got it back to the shop and taken care of all the maintenance items that need to be taken care of. We evidently chose about the hottest day of the year to do this, and here's where we're walking around the vehicle. This was the first time this car had seen sunlight. That garage door that was behind it had actually been nailed shut to keep anyone from popping the door open by accident and I guess letting anybody know that car was there. Being as that the driveway was a paver stone style, we didn't want to back the trailer down and possibly scuff some of the pavers with the ramps. It's kind of an upscale neighborhood, and the previous owner had just sold this house, so I didn't want to mess it up and cause a problem there. Turns out the driveway had a little more of a incline than we thought, so pushing it uphill on that hot day was a little more work than we expected, but we finally got it up there. Jockeyed it around, got it lined up with the trailer, and I do have a winch, of course, so we pulled it up on there again. Didn't want to start the vehicle or crank it over. So once we got it loaded up, put it behind the old Silverado that you've seen in some of the other videos and hauled it to the shop. Now, David and I have owned and worked on many lowered vehicles over the years, but this thing just about takes the cake. A 2x4 almost doesn't clear the front splitter or the front lower part of the spoiler, so getting it on the trailer was a little bit of work. So here we are, loaded up, ready to go. Luckily, we didn't have to go far. And here in front of the shop, gravity made unloading much easier. Again, David and I have worked on cars together for a long time, so we had this process down pretty well. And once we got it off the trailer, and of course right there in front of the shop's pretty level, so it was a piece of cake to get that pushed in and put into its home for the next few months. As we were pushing the car in, I took this picture to send to another friend of mine as a joke that, hey, look what I bought. Little did I know that would actually come true. It's pretty obvious there's not a lift in the shop, and I don't own quick jacks or anything like that. So when I'm putting a car up in the air, I do it the old-fashioned way, hydraulic jacks and jack stands. It's worked fine for me so far. Anyway, once I got it up in the air, started pulling the wheels and tires off, and the wheels had, I guess, corroded to the center hub so tight that I actually had to take a rubber mallet and beat the wheels and tires off of the center hub. Of course, beating on the tire didn't hurt the wheels or anything, but it was did make for a lot more work just to get wheels and tires off of a car. So this was actually the first Viper I'd ever worked on, so I actually had to look up how to raise the hood, and then of course found all the things on the internet about how not to do it so you don't break it, which had me nervous. Started off with simple things, draining the oil. That was obviously old and needed to be gotten out of there. Then went from there, fresh filter,
drain the fuel system and so on. The previous owner had told me that the battery likely had been dead for a decade or more, so I knew that that was never going to take a charge again. So here, the process of pulling that battery out on a Viper, they are behind the driver's rear wheel, tucked in the bumper area. So of course the wheel had to come off anyway because the tires were shot. But you take all the fasteners out of this little panel, about a half a dozen bolts or so and a couple clips. And then once you get that out of there, you have access to a battery that is like a GM style side post. Of course, it has a bracket and everything that holds it in place. This vehicle have an aftermarket stereo, had some extra wiring that was in there. Wasn't a big deal. I have experience with that, so wasn't a big problem to deal with that at all. I didn't mean to record this in time lapse, and I guess when I hit record I did not switch it to that mode, so I have sped this up as fast as the software that I use will let me, but apologize for the extra length here. This could have been a little shorter clip, I guess. So basically, after disconnecting everything and getting the bracket loose, finally fished the battery out, and just as I suspected, it was in not so great a shape. You'll see here in just a second that the battery itself seemed to had swollen to the point where it was pushing outward on the case. So could have possibly frozen or just sulfated to the point that it was no good. So I'm glad I didn't even bother trying to charge that thing. And with most battery installs, the installation is the reverse of the removal. Hook everything back up. Remember, always do your ground last. And put the cover back on, and she has a new battery, and the car had power again. So this part was just kind of a general walk around that I had done, talking about how this is an 01 GTS car in sapphire blue with silver stripes. It's a 1-year color. 01 is the first year for anti-lock brakes on these cars. Typically they were known for not having any nannies or any helpful aids, but they did add ABS in 01. This car had made its way to Hennessey in Texas for a 650R stroker package. According to the badge on the console anyway, and the way it sounds, whoever owned it before evidently really liked to party though, and wanted to crank it up even further, as they had also installed a nitrous kit on the car. The kit is 99% installed, as the activation switch that goes on the throttle body had never been connected or mounted. So I think it was more or less for show at this point. Since the car had sat for so long, I wanted to make sure that no critters had gotten into the engine, or that there had been any moisture problems with the cylinders, anything like that. So here I'm pulling the spark plugs out so that I can get my borescope down in the cylinder, and we can check and just see if there's any major glaring issues inside. I don't know if I show it on here, but I actually did pull the air filters out and run the scope down through the throttle bodies to make sure that there wasn't anything living in the intake manifold, just to be sure. Some of these plugs were in there pretty tight. I guess whoever put them in at some point didn't believe in putting anti-seize or anything on the threads, so they were in there pretty good. So there's the borescope. It's one of those deals where you hook it up to I got an old iPad that I use, and looks pretty good. I can take stills and video and everything else. Everything looked pretty good. Once I was convinced or confident that the engine didn't have any glaring issues, I decided to go ahead and fill it back up with oil. Went to the old standby Mobil one, what the oil cap called for. I know it's a modified engine, but I figured in this case, at least it was something to get it started with and make sure that the thing actually ran. If it wound up being junk, then at least I didn't have some crazy expensive oil in there that I was just going to dump out anyway. So topped that back off and then started to address the fuel system.
Just wanted to show what I'm going to do here. I'm going to drain the fuel tank on this Viper. This car has had the fuel rail tapped for a nitrous line. Car's got a nitrous kit on it. This car again has been sitting for 12 years and the gas was in it when it was parked. So what I did is I had an old AN fitting that I just put a piece of hose onto. I want to connect that to here. Got my jump box over there. Going to hook up power to the pump. Run the hose down into a fuel jug and see if we can get the tank drained. Hopefully there's not but just a few gallons in there and it doesn't come out looking like mud.
Turns out there was only a few gallons in there and really didn't smell all that bad. So I dumped into 5 gallons of good 93 octane in there. Cranked the engine over with no plugs in it, get some oil flow to the top of the engine, maybe pump the lifters up a little bit, and then put the plugs in, put some anti-seize on the threads, put some dielectric grease on the plug wires, and basically the vehicle fired right up and settled into an idle. And from then on, it was just a matter of putting everything back together, wheels and tires wise, and getting it all cleaned up. So then when it was done, here it is. And that's kind of the backstory of how this car came to be in my possession. From here on out, I've got some things I want to change on the car, some things I'm going to address as far as common failure points. I do plan on driving the car, at least for a while, so the low mileage helps me out quite a bit. So if you like what you see, please like, comment, subscribe, and of course hit that bell if you want to know when more videos are posted. Thanks for watching.